Bienvenue à tous, merci de votre participation. Pour écouter notre session en français, veuillez cliquer en bas de votre écran sur l'onglet « Interprétation » et sélectionner le drapeau français. Merci.
On behalf of ICLEI Africa, the African Center for Cities, Our Future Cities, Surge Africa, and the Red Cross Crescent Climate Center, we are delighted to welcome you to the Rise Africa 2024 Action Festival. Rise Africa is a platform that brings together thinkers, doers, and enablers to inspire action for sustainable cities. This is our 4th edition of our Rise Africa Action Festival, which brings together insights, practices, and visions from across the continent under this year's theme of Solutions Only, Failures Also. This year's theme provokes us to change the way we view our cities and approach their development, particularly to promote a solutions orientation to our worldview. The festival invites you to embrace different ways of knowing, to seek ways to bridge science, policy, business, and arts in creative ways. It invites you to forge new partnerships, experiment with new concepts and ideas, and drive change in your homes and communities. This year's festival, we are running a social media storm to share how urbanization is happening in Africa, that cities can be centers of possibility, and how we can inspire action for sustainable African cities. Please share these for the days of the festival, including Africa Day, the 25th of May. As is tradition, we invite you to enter this session in a spirit of creativity.
يطيب العيش هنا في إفريقية بالهدوء والسلام والرفاهية، وفي قارة الخيرات السبع الكل ينام متعبا من الشبع، لا فقر لا عنف ولا جوع، لا ظلم لا قهر ولا دموع. نحتفي بالتنوع والتعددية، نزرع بذور التسامح ونقطع جذور العنصرية. يطيب العيش هنا في إفريقية حيث العدل والمساواة والسلمية، وقوانين وسياسات وأنظمة ديمقراطية ومشاريع تحفيزية، والحب والسعادة والحرية. ننعم بثرواتنا الطبيعية ونعالج المشاكل المناخية. كم يطيب العيش هنا في إفريقية. سمعت صوتا يقول هذه الحكاية، لا أدري إن كانت هذه النهاية لحلم راودني أثناء النوم، أو ربما هو صوت من غد أفضل، وهذه البداية لحلم يتحقق مع أحفاد اليوم. ولا أدري ما الذي يجب أن نفعله نحن الآن ليطيب العيش في إفريقية، وكي لا نعود إلى زمن الخوف والاستبدادية، ونتخلص من مهرجي الشعبوية ومطبلي النظام والدكتاتورية.
Good morning, and welcome to the second day of the Rise Africa 2024 Festival. Thank you for joining us. Quite an apt way to enter into the session. A bit contemplative, I must say. My name is Familiarity, and together with my colleagues Luca Drea and Jukudu Guya, as well as the rest of the Rise team, we're excited to host you today. I invite you to journey with us throughout today's Rise Africa Festival, but also to come on board tomorrow again, because this has been a journey since yesterday. Bringing us back to the theme of this year's festival, Solutions Only, Failures Also. Yesterday, our host, Paul Corey, and the amazing panel and provocateurs inspired us to put solutions ahead. Through an insightful panel discussion, we had an in-depth exploration of many of the on-ground solutions that are going on across the continent, all of which centered people, and urged us to re-engage with solutions through multiple perspectives while giving hope, inspiration, and action the wings to catalyze these solutions. Today, we breach the other half of our theme, the one which no one likes to speak about, failures. And so, before we carry on, I invite you all to pause and to let us restart this session with a different paradigm, one which embraces failure. I invite you today to sit comfortably, side by side, the ideology and the thought that failure is okay, that failure is part of innovation, and that failure is part of solutions. But more importantly, that failure is a part of the general human condition. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this session, which explores a topic that is both timely and crucial: the complexities of global inequities, and the pervasive fear of failure that shapes our world and that shapes the ways in which we navigate the world. Our cities all across Africa, vibrant as they are and full of potential, are standing at a crossroad. On the one side is tradition, and on the other side is innovation. African cities in particular, with all of the energy and the creativity and the resilience, continue to grapple with very significant challenges. We cannot gloss these challenges over, because within these challenges lies crucial lessons and moments for innovation. We acknowledge the realities of our urban landscapes, where the quest for equity on the one hand and sustainability on the other hand is a daily struggle, and sometimes, frankly speaking, unsuccessful. The question is, how do we tangle with being unsuccessful? How do we tangle with failing? How do we address the numerous examples of failure surrounding us, from failing institutions to crumbling infrastructure and ineffective systems, to unsuccessful projects and the broader challenges that face our continent? Today's session is designed to unravel that fear of failure that you and I constantly carry, and that permeates our institutions, our worldviews, and our everyday interactions and actions. This fear, many times unspoken, can hinder our ability to speak truth to power and to admit that proposed solutions are just not a fit and are just not working. But how about if we could turn this fear on its head? How about if we could see failure not as an end point, but as a crucial part of a journey towards progress, towards innovation, and towards solutioning? By reframing failures as invaluable learning opportunities, we stand the chance to empower ourselves as individuals, as practitioners, as academics. We stand a chance to empower the different organizations, the CSOs, the CBOs, and to even inspire our governments, from local through to national and regional governments, to navigate challenges more adeptly and to help drive change that truly means change. My colleagues, Luca Jokudu and I, together with an amazing lineup of panel, are joining you all today in this conversation about failure. I'm super stoked today about the panel which we've successfully curated and who have graciously accepted to come speak to us all about failure and to help enrich this conversation. I'm not going to read out the whole of their bios because Luca will be putting that into the chat as we go along, but I'm just going to highlight who we have today on the panel. We have Jesper Hornberg from the Global Resilience Partnership. We have Professor Gechi Karuri Sabina from the Wits School of Governance. We have Professor Robert Doya Nanima from the University of the Western Cape. We have Ebenezer Wikina, who is from Policy Shapers. We have Erin Sweeney, an artist, a writer, and a curator. And we have Clever Ocholi, an amazing, amazing youth speaker, who all together bring on board different perspectives of how they view failure, how they understand failure, and how failure has been a journey for them. And so, in beginning and urging you to embrace and to sit comfortably with failure, I have a little assignment for us to start off this session. I would like to start today's session by asking you one word to which you're going to respond to on a Mentimeter. And that Mentimeter is going to be shown on our screen. So there is currently a link in the chat. I encourage you to please click on that link. And it has one prompt. What one word encapsulates embracing failure for you? I'm going to give us all 5 minutes, 3 minutes to think about, gather all of our thoughts. When you think of failure, when you think of what failure means to you, encapsulate it in one word. What one word encapsulates embracing failure for you? As you write, please put it into the Mentimeter and we will share that. Okay. The words are coming through. We have resilience, breathing, flexibility, growth, courage, experimentation, accepting, disappointment, hope, try again, agility, evolution, learn, context, progress. There's a phrase there, blessing in disguise. Quite interesting, so weird too. Love that. Journey, embracing diversity, activate a plan B. Absolutely. Thank you very much for joining us in this reflective mode and for very nicely welcoming yourself into this session on embracing failure. I will now turn to Clever Ocholi, who takes this a little deeper with her creative provocation on the fears of failing now and failing forward. Clever, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for me. Hello, everybody. Welcome, welcome. Really wonderful to see you here. This is the story of Taiwo. I just want to talk about how it's affecting my mental health. This thing called failure. I had a plan, and if the system was reliable, I would have graduated 3 years ago. I would have a job, get married or not, If the system was reliable, I would be living in my own house, not with my parents. Do you know? Sometimes I even stay with friends and family. I just want to talk about this thing called failure, how it's been affecting my mental health. Why do some people win and win while others just fail or move slowly in life, in school, in their careers, and financially? The system really is against me, and the odds are never in my favor. I just want to talk about how it's affecting my mental health. When I go out to the streets of social media, everyone looks so happy and very successful. They say that some people have touched the stars while others are creating them, literally, or so it seems. For example, that girl bought her second car at age 23. They say she's a top executive at a tech company. That boy got a new job outside the country. They say he's the youngest PhD holder at his place of work. The other day, someone got 5 job offers and another one received a promotion. Then some random guy won the lottery. Why do some people win while others just fail and fail or move very slowly in life, in school, and financially? You know, I applied for a scholarship the other day, but I didn't. I couldn't make it to the second stage. The other day, I dared to challenge the system, but I was punching a cold wall. Wasted and hurtful effort. The system really is against me, and the odds are never in my favor. I just want to talk about how it's affecting my mental health. This thing called failure. I wonder if there are people like me, those who struggled against a system that failed to support them. I wonder if there are people like me who have seen and suffered like I have. What did they learn? How did they get past these limitations? And how did they fail forward? I want to talk about the fear of failing and how it's been affecting my mental health. And you know, if I had a community that could nurture me, I too can do the same for those who will come after me. I will tell the community I raise about the fear of failure. I will tell them the story of how the fear of failure paralyzed me. And despite all my sound strategies to not fail, I have experienced and continue to experience failure. Apparently, it's a part of life. When I raise this community, I will tell them that I failed. We don't talk about failures and limitations. When we mention challenges, we write one paragraph and then share 10 paragraphs to celebrate our wins and successes. Why do we hide failures? No one talks about the long, darkest night where our only companion is fear and anxiety, regrets, anger, and confusion. Why can't we be a community that supports people struggling with things like this? We only want to be associated with success and big names, but many of them are coming from a place, and no one is interested in that. That cannot be healthy. We should talk about failures and the fear of failing forward, acknowledge it and accept it. I am afraid of failing. Embrace the fear of failure. I would bring it up close and study it, no matter how uncomfortable it feels. Then I will identify why I am afraid of failing and explore ways to fail forward. I will be kind to myself because sometimes there's only so much I can do. I will be kind to myself because being afraid of failure or choosing to be bitter about a system that seems unwilling to help me will only make me disturbed and frustrated. I will be kind to myself and give myself a break because even in failure, I can learn a thing or two. When I raise my community, I will tell them that failures are opportunities to learn from. So if I fail now, I fail forward. By failing forward, I choose to identify lessons and create innovative solutions to help me and others navigate failures in the health and education sector, the socioeconomic sector, and the creative and tech sectors. I will tell my community about failing forward in life. I like the idea of failing forward. So upon this premise, I can use the lessons of yesterday to build the future I want today. Yes, by failing forward, I can be kinder to myself and my mental health wouldn't be so wound up. It takes a change in perspective to accept the concept of failing forward. From our foundation as young children, we have been taught to reject failure and not talk about it. So we demonize failure and struggle with this thing called failing forward. But don't you see? That's where we limit ourselves and remain in a box. And then those who fail dare to think outside the box because it's the only option they have. Failing forward is a break period that enables us to explore realities we might not have imagined before. Wouldn't you agree that strength comes from a place of weakness? If we didn't experience darkness, how would we know to put a light bulb out front? Sometimes it takes self-reflection, creativity, and community to progress despite failing. It takes a change in perspective to accept the concept of failing forward. This is the story of Taiwo. I think you know who Taiwo is. Thank you.
Thank you. I see many of us clapping. Thank you very much, Clever. I almost feel like on that note, we're done for the day because Clever has very succinctly and cleverly summarized all of our notes. And thank you for that introduction and for launching us in. I think several things struck me, but the one thing that you said was those who fail dare to think outside the box. And I think it's on that premise that we put together this panel, of which, of course, you're one. Because for everyone who is on this panel today, we have seen you think outside the box. And so we have invited you today to share the lessons in thinking outside the box. I think that's a lovely way to capture failure, thinking outside of the box. And so I'm going to turn to you now, Jesper, and invite you for your 3 to 5 minutes provocation on the global institutional failures and their influence on Africa. Jesper?
Thank you so much. And how do I follow that act? I was hoping you wouldn't start with me because I needed some time to recover. It's really good. Failure is something we see every day. And I think sometimes there is failure that we don't actually acknowledge as well. But in the recent 5 years or so, from COVID and onwards with various wars that have really disrupted the global supply chains, financial systems, and so on, a lot of those failures have come to light, and we see those now much more, which is a good thing. So I think failure is really an opportunity to see what's not working and adjust it and course adjust. And we need to not stigmatize it so much, and we need to find that safe space that Clever was talking about, because it really affects not only us as individuals, but also as the big institutions that are trying to do things. I think there are a couple of things. I think the problems that the lack of a functioning global institutional framework to address what's happening in Africa, and especially the cities, is an urgent one. I think there are two major factors that have already been mentioned, but one is there is a growing population in Africa, and according to the World Economic Forum, 17 of the 20 biggest cities on the planet will actually be in Africa. And we're talking mega cities across the continent. and it's not, we're not geared up to deal with those mega cities today and everything that implies. And the other thing is climate change, and the need for adaptation, and building resilience. Now, if you want to build proper resilience, and do remember that I am from the Stockholm Resilience Center, so resilience is something we think a lot about. You need to really think about failure as an opportunity to learn and to adapt and be agile. These are all attributes of being resilient. But being resilient is not the ability to cope with and recover from an external shock. It's the ability to transform in the face of that external shock and those challenges that you're facing, so that you don't end up on square one, but you actually progress and you find yourself in a better situation. And that needs to happen on so many different levels, at community level, at regional level, at national level, and at continental level in this case. So if there's anything I think we've seen clearly is we've started to see light shining through some of the cracks in that broken system. We need to address them. We need to do this in a very inclusive way. The global institutions need to take that into account. And I think so they need to listen, right? But I think it's also very important to make noise so that they have something to listen to and be structured in what it is that you bring to the table. And this includes the climate adaptation, the human rights, the rights of children, the right of functioning societies. So there's responsibility on both sides, I think is what I'm saying. Honesty and trust are two of my leading words. And you can only build a trusting relationship where you have an open, destigmatized discussion around what's working, what's not working, if you work on the relationships and you build that trust through honesty and clarity. I think I'll pause there. I could talk about failure for a long time. I'm really good at failure. I've even done a study on failure, which I'm happy to share if you want to learn more about failure.
Thank you very much, Jesper. I think you're the first person who will so openly admit to happily discuss failure and to be very good at failure. Thank you very much. But I think that leans very much into your central point around destigmatizing failure, and also links back to Clever's creative entry on us creating safe spaces for failure. Let me turn the spotlight now to a more regional perspective and bring Professor Nanima on board to just briefly reflect as your entry provocation on the regional institutional failures which continue to shape Africa's geopolitical position. I say this particularly with regard to something Jesper mentioned. He noted that resilience is the ability to transform in the face of challenges. Now, the challenges that beset us as Africa are numerous, and we can sit all day. But what does that look like from an African perspective and from regional institutional failures, and how that continues to shape the narrative of where Africa currently sits? Robert?
Thank you very much for me. I also felt I needed a few more minutes to recover from what the last two speakers have said. Starting from the concept of resilience, I would run to what the founding father of this nation stated, Nelson Mandela, concerning resilience, when he stated that don't judge me by my successes. That's very easy. But judge me by how many times I fell and got up again.
I apologize for that. We seem to have been bumped. Prof, do I give you a minute or two? Are you ready to continue?
No, I can continue.
Thank you very much.
That's a classical example of getting up from failure.
Thank you.
Yes, so from the perspective, don't judge by the successes. That's very easy, but by how many times a person gets up again. And perhaps another aspect is say that whenever you finish a mountain, whenever you finish climbing a mountain, there are always many more to climb. So from a regional institutional perspective, failures in terms of the geopolitical standing, in terms of the key successes, in terms of fostering political stability, I would like to say that when we have a good appreciation of the various organizations that we have at a regional level, we understand failure from the perspective of the vantage point that they presented, or that an individual presents, or that an institution presents, or that an organization presents. When you look at failure from the vantage point of learning from it, then you are able to create solutions. Why do I say this? At the time the OAU was created, it was created to deal with aspects of colonialism, colonization. That was dealt with. Having been dealt with, it was not going to be an issue for 100 years later on. But the challenge that brought, it still kept in place the need to continue having leaders.
The meeting, please go ahead.
Okay, yes, thank you. So the question of the OAE, it was dealing with aspects of colonialism. When those were dealt with, there was a need to look at other aspects of development, moving from that specific spectrum. But the question was, how would that translate from the regional level, from the continental level to the national level? And that was a very big gap. It's just that in the diplomatic circles, it could not be looked at as failure, it could be looked at as a challenge. And in a way, I would like to say that was a good thing from the perspective that instead of looking at the failure, it was looked at as a challenge, as a place from where we would improve going forward. There has been a lot of traction towards improvement in those spaces, aspects such as having Agenda 2063 that speaks to economic growth, that speaks to the place of the youth, the place of women, the place of children as being very critical and central. Having aspects such as Agenda 2040 that speaks to the well-being of children, something that Jasper spoke about, that is very instructive. Now, on the global perspective, we have the SDG Agenda 2030 that has 16 goals. So I think in engaging various initiatives from a continental perspective is instructive in dealing with what we are calling failures, challenges. But it's not something that can be concluded in a day, that can be concluded in a week. I think this is a space that needs all of us to do our best in terms of whatever we can bring to the table and improve. I believe there are a lot of successes, but what about the failures? How do we learn from them? And I think learning from them is a critical point to looking at those failures, one as challenges, from looking at them as perspectives from which we can learn a thing, as looking at them as perspectives from which we are closer to success, as looking at them as something that informs the process that helps us to engage things instructively, and picking lessons, and above all, as having aspects of resilience. I'll conclude with this. What does that mean for our cities? Usually the narrative from the cities is that there's always the narrative of we the nationals, we the citizenry, we the persons in this city. There's always the narrative from dealing with something within and speaking to successes within without dealing with the global citizen who's coming from without. So failures should also be looked at from the perspective that in terms of global equities, what is it that we're doing for everyone who is coming within our spaces? There's a time we had a conversation with the government of Lesotho. I'm concluding with this. and we're asking questions about children affected by armed conflict. And the government of Lesotho said, we don't have armed conflict. And we said, as much as you don't have armed conflict, we have children from without who are coming to within your spaces, and there should be programs that are engaged for them. So looking at the global village, dealing with what is within and what is without is critical to dealing with what we would call failures, and using that to step up and continue running forward. Thank you very much, and I appreciate the time. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Prof. I think that was very insightful to think about failures from the perspective of the opportunities they present at different scales, globally, regionally, but also what opportunities are presented to us on a city level. And then also thinking around failures within different sectors and within different spectrums. And on that basis, I want to turn to the other prof in our midst, Prof. Geshi. We are currently, like we have seen, in the age of technology and AI with all its failings and its trappings. And can I invite you to just reflect a bit on failure as a catalyst for reimagining the use of technology and artificial intelligence, particularly in the context of African urban development?
Thank you so much, Winnie. Unfortunately, I'm not able to open my camera. I suspect our security standards have been raised. Perhaps the host can try to allow me if he is able.
So, yes, if I take a moment, so we do have.
Oh, there we are.
Perfect.
Yeah, you should be able to start your video. There we go.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Luther.
Share their screens.
Okay, and I'll not be sharing my screen. I think we've had enough of that. So thank you so much for inviting me and welcoming me to this conversation. It was interesting being asked to reflect on something that I particularly love, which is failure. And I think other colleagues have kind of alluded to the fact that we don't really learn if we're not failing. And this idea of what emerging technologies like AI, ideas we have about the smart city and all of that, and where we can begin to see some kind of catalytic role of failure in reimagining things is something I really welcome the opportunity to speak on. So I wanted to share a few things and perhaps just 3 big points in the short time I have, and I look forward to the discussion. The one is I wondered what key failures I think I have seen in terms of, so when you're talking about failure in general, are there specific categories or types of failure that one is thinking about or commenting on in this space? Okay, my video seems to have gone off again. It says the co-host has stopped my video. But I'll carry on, maybe while Luca tries to fix it. Okay, now it says I can start again. Okay, anyway, I'll carry on if there are video issues. One, and first and foremost, I think is a failure of imagination. I've written quite a bit about this, and I think many of us hopefully know what I'm talking about, in that when we think about technological change and the city, when we talk about what the smart city is, particularly in the African context, I think there's a profound lack of imagination and a failure of really developing new imaginaries about what that could mean. And therefore, part of what I've commentated, as others have, about are these static images we begin to create, both about what is possible as an outcome, so what does a smart city look like, but also what gets us there. And so what smartness means and what opportunity we think technology affords us, I think there's a failure of imagination. I'll come back to the point about imagination. I think I also see a failure in coordination. What that has to do is, in a way, seeing smartness in bits, if I can call it that. And I don't mean bits technologically, I mean in pieces. So a very fragmented view of how you achieve the city, and whether that is sectoral silos, or whether that is technological silos, or whether that is stakeholder, private sector, public sector versus community silos. I think all of that, in a way, fails to optimize the opportunity that we have, and I'm just broadly calling that a failure in coordination. And the last one I thought was a failure in institutional and funding models. I think that matters. City building has a lot to do with how we capitalize and how we institutionalize. And I think we've really failed to reimagine those institutions and those ways of, if you want, financing or sponsoring this idea of the smart city and maybe the technologies or platforms that get us there. So that's how I was thinking about what are failures, and then we can get into specific examples of all of those. And I think those failures in part are driven by, and I'm going to be a bit playful, but I think we can in the Rise Africa space. I was thinking it's to do with the context, right, that we find ourselves in. And what I began to play with there is this idea that, everybody loves these acronyms of, oh, we are in a VUCA world, and because it's volatile and uncertain and complex and ambiguous, therefore X, so therefore we behave like X. There's another acronym some of you may have heard of, which is BANI. BANI is in a way a leadership response, or sometimes considered to be an alternative theory, but I think it's a leadership response, which is that leadership becomes brittle, anxious, non-linear, and incomprehensible. And then I try to play that forward to ask, so what does that result in terms of what I see in the city and tech space? And I said it results in reactive, obvious, boring, and tedious behaviors. And I'll put that on the chat for those who want to use my brand new acronym. And in a way, now what have I done? I'm to change my whole screen here. Okay, there we go. And in a way, I'm kind of maybe playing with a robot just because it probably links to the technological theme I'm supposed to be speaking on, but it's honestly what I see. So we're talking about smart cities with robot institutions, which in fact are not very likely to create anything very smart. So I think given that, I kind of wondered what am I seeing in terms of the AI or the technological space that could really help us see failure differently and deal with that fear of failure. And I think there are two main words I'd like to share. I'd like to share the word reframe. Reframe is not a new word, but it is gaining more currency recently. And what is reframing about? The capacity to reframe is something we all have. The ability to reperceive, to reimagine, to re-engage, to innovate. AI plays a role in that, and whether it's through the data analytics and insights it enables, or new forms of simulation, new forms of engagement that are possible. So when we talk about the participation the previous speaker was speaking on, technologies allow us to do that. But if we continue to do it in the same frame, so if you're just using the technology to keep on working and playing around the same set of ideas, the same unimaginative robot set of ideas, then I think in a way we don't optimize that opening to reimagine and to ideate. In this regard, I'd like to share a colleague whose work I really appreciate. So some of you might know Dr. Sechaba Mape, who I think has done and shows us a really interesting example about how a scholar whose work has very much been in understanding indigeneity around the African city then begins to use, the latest technology, AI. Yes.
Could I please be a little rude and interrupt you there? And just this is something that was noted at the beginning before you had joined, but just a gentle reminder to please keep note of the pace of your speaking. We do have French to English and English to French interpretation enabled for this session. So if we could all just be a little mindful to try and speak as slowly and as intentionally as possible to give our interpreters a bit of breathing room to assist us, it would be fantastic. Thank you, and sorry for the interruption.
Me? Sorry?
Yes, that's it.
Okay, you agree. Okay, thank you. And sorry about that. I overexcited, and the more excited I get, the faster I speak. So I think the point here was the reframe, sharing the work of Dr. Mape and talking about how we can use the technology to exit the frame, actually, and then to do what he repeatedly says. If you get a chance to look at the video on this site, it's basically an exhibit called Nohamo Josie, which was showcased at the Venice Biennale last year. And he basically uses AI to reimagine a future African city, Johannesburg, in that case. And he has this iterative call to zoom in, zoom out, to blend, to combine, to iterate. And it's that iterate point I want to pick up on, because I think that's my second big word for today is, and certainly the technology helps us do this, is to iterate, is the idea that if you begin to see failure as part of cycles of experimentation, and that word's also been used before, the learning, obviously you mainly learn from failure, as well as from some successes, so reversing that, you incorporate learnings, you adjust, you act, and then you keep going through that. As you act, you learn and you iterate. The technology allows us to do this. We can really have that learning and improvement focus, whether it's through using the iterative learning, for example, that AI allows us to do. You can create experimental policy spaces, or whether we all talk about things like the digital twin, which I have particular issue with just from a cost perspective. But there are various things we can do to, in a way, see the space of city making and even the space of technological. Thanks, Luca. As one of that cycle of experimentation enabled by technology, but not defined by technology. So the smart city is not defined by technology. The ideas are not defined by the technology. There's something more relational that can happen there. So I think that's what I wanted to share today. Maybe I'll leave with this. So the reframe, the iteration, but also perhaps a bit of understanding about when we're talking about city making and even the idea of the smart city, maybe recognizing whether we are in the space of incrementalism, whether we're in the space of adaptation or in a space of transformation. I think for many of us, we have to be in a space of transformation. We are not working within an idea that exists, and therefore we have to innovate, we have to reimagine, we have to ideate, and I think there's a lot of space to fail, obviously, because when you try to do something different, you are almost welcoming yourself or opening the possibility of failure. But to understand that failure is part of this cycle of experimentation we have to enter. And I think these are exciting times. So I'll hand back to you, Funmi, and then I hope that contributes to the conversation.
Thank you very much, Geshi. There are a lot of words there, and I'm not going to try to rehash many of them, but I think many of them, for me, are almost sort of like a repetition on some of the key points that have come through from some of the speakers, particularly when we think around the idea of reframing, reimagining, re-engaging, and also of iterating and seeing failure as part of a cycle of experimentation. I think based on that, I would like to ask Ebenezer for his own thoughts around the policy research gap and impacts, particularly as someone who works with community, who works on community mobilization at the ground to help influence policy. And when you think about Geshi's provocation on seeing failure as part of the cycles of experimentation and reimagining and creating the space for ideation there, what does that mean in terms of the work that you do? Ebenezer?
Yes, no, thank you. Thank you so much for me. And thanks to all of the speakers who have remained very, poised despite all of the interruptions. Just to say that, yeah, I mean, I 100% plus one to what Professor Geshi said about, just ensuring that failure is part of the policy process as well. And if you look at what the policy development process is, generally, it's a cycle. It starts from ideation and goes all the way to implementation, and then there's a place where you do evaluation, and then that feeds in back to ideation again, because the belief is that there can hardly be any quote perfect policy, and so you keep reiterating and you keep changing as things basically go on. And I think if you look at the question around the policy research gap, I think what the challenge has been for us on the continent generally has been on how we ensure that our policy ideas respond to problems. And I just shared something. I was supposed to share my screen, but for our security reasons, we are disabled that. I just shared something in the chat. It's slowly loading, but it's something that's used a lot in public policy. It's called the problem tree analysis. And most of the time, one of the reasons why our policy on the continent for most countries is ineffective is because we tend to address consequences of problems as opposed to addressing the root causes of problems, right? So a good example of this, for example, would be that, so let's say that there's a community that has issues with potable water, right? Or maybe the water sources are getting bad, right? You would find most governments and policymakers building hospitals to treat cholera, as opposed to going to the communities to find out why the water source, has issues, or try to employ more doctors and nurses to care for those with cholera, which is good, right? But if you keep caring for cholera, you would keep getting more cholera, right? I mean, you really wouldn't solve the problem at its roots, right? So you find that because of the gap between research and policy making and practice, that's implementation, we sort of like embrace policy making with sort of like assumptions of what we think the problems are without like really good empirical studies and findings as to what problems really and how we can really, really address them. And I think that this is something that you'd see cut across several sectors of our economy, several sectors of our respective countries across the continent. And I think that that's really, if I think of just that question on the policy practice gap, I think that that is really at the heart of it. How do we ensure that we can really, really find the problems? And how do we ensure that we're also very flexible? One of the words on the Mentimeter was flexibility. How are we flexible in our policy making such that our policymakers even bold enough, because it takes courage. Are you bold enough to say, okay, I actually tried this and it's actually not even working? Like not every idea would be the best idea. How are we even humble enough to even borrow ideas from our other countries? As Nigeria learning from South Africa, as South Africa learning from Lesotho, as Ghana learning from Egypt? Are we able to also listen to what's working in other countries and easily borrow those ideas to also like solve things in our own context? So yeah, so I know our time is fast spent, but I think that I just wanted to just drop this as my opening thoughts, especially around how policy can be a space where we can keep learning from our failures. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ebenezer. Short and sweet to the point. And thank you very much also for sharing that image with us. Very apt and actually speaks to a lot of the institutional failures and what much of our problems are in terms of rather addressing the fruits rather than the actual consequences, the root causes of what the problems are. But I come back to this idea, and which Geshe had mentioned also, but which you also mentioned around ideation. And there was something which you said that struck me. Ideation takes courage in and of itself. And I want to flip that on its head a bit and invite Erin into the conversation for her initial provocation. I would imagine that I'm not an artist, but as an artist, I am a lover of the art, however. As an artist, as a curator, as a writer, there's a lot of ideation that goes on, but there's also a lot of failure within that space, ideas that work, ideas that do not work. And so, Erin, I just wanted to ask you to let us in on what creative approaches to embracing failures as a catalyst for innovation and for transformation looks like. Erin?
Hello. Yeah, I think that failure in creativity and failure in art, I would almost say it doesn't exist. I think that the failure in creativity is the failure to act on creativity. I think once you have acted on a creative impulse, that is already a success. I think that when we imagine failure in creativity, we're imagining like a product that isn't being sold. Like we imagine a failed artist being someone who's not selling their work and not exhibiting in big places. But that's really a failure to engage with like an art world or a commercial art space or something like that. And I think that that framing within our culture of art being and creativity being something that exists in these like white cube spaces that feel very inaccessible makes us not want to engage with our creativity that I think everyone has and our like inclination towards creating and things like that. I think that failure, like the idea of failure, is centered around an endpoint that we think that we haven't like reached or hasn't like kind of culminated in the way that we wanted to. And I think when we instead reframe the things that we do as things that are continual and require constant attention and process, then we no longer have a failure, because it's like there isn't an end goal we didn't achieve. There's an acknowledgement that we are always going to be working on things and always going to be engaging with them, and there isn't an absence or something we didn't gain, because we're always working and gaining. And I think that second to that, creativity is always about engaging with failures, and it doesn't exist. And arts is always an engagement with failure. I mean, artists need failures to have something to write about and talk about. And that can be personal failures, that can be failures that they've experienced through systemic structures. It can be like many different kinds of failures. So I think that creativity in art is really a wonderful space that is always talking to and engaging with failure. And I think that's very exciting, but I also do feel there's like things that keep people out of creativity and keep people that don't kind of encourage and, you know, enthuse people to engage with their own creativity. Because there is this idea that there's like a failure aspect to it. And I think that failure aspect is not a failure in creativity. I'm repeating myself here, but a failure in creativity is just a failure to act on it, in my opinion. So yeah, I think it's about reframing failure as inevitable, because in the same way that failure is inevitable, creativity is inevitable. Because, I mean, I studied fine arts. Naturally, people ask me what I'm going to do with that degree. And they're like, what is the importance of art? What is the importance of creativity in like society? And I think that asking the importance of it is the wrong question. It's not important, it's just going to happen. People are always going to be creative. People are always going to be inclined towards like the arts, and we try and understand it as something that can be quantifiable, and therefore we can have a lack of things that are quantifiable and therefore failures in art. But as soon as we understand that it's just something that is constantly happening, it's the same way that people cook and people shower, people make art, people are creative, people want to engage with artistic things, and then go to these things for comfort from the failures, like systemic failures, but they also go to them because they want to create and they want to engage. So I think that the kind of relationship between art and creativity and failure is very intertwined. And I think that it's most kind of productive and most effective and most wonderful when we accept like the constant production of things that, and the failure is always going to be there. So I think it's about understanding that the possibility to act on your creativity should not be limited to the possibility of failure. I think that failure, like, I think everyone has said this kind of consistently, that failure is always going to happen. It's just gonna happen. So it's like, as soon as we're like, cool, I can't wait to fail, because that's gonna give me more to talk about, it's gonna give me more to feel. I think that that is a really big, important shift if you want to be successful, is to aim for failure. And yeah, I think that's what I have to say on that.
Thank you very much, Erin. I think that is quite a shift. We started incrementally from beginning to think about the opportunities, the options, the building of resilience within failure, but now to totally embrace it as part of the process and to say art, creativity, failure, all intertwined. And it brings me back to a discussion we had at the end of day one yesterday, something you said about art being there, always being there. Art is in science, art is in technology, art is in everything. It's all around us. Whether we see it is a different thing. And so art isn't necessarily this othered thing that happens and that we need to think about differently, which is why at Rise, we are very conscious of embedding the art as a part of what we do. But when we take on that perspective, then it's easier actually to embrace failure, really, because then we must think about failure being a part of the process of creativity. And if we must be creative, we must fail. If we must fail, we must be creative. I think that lands us at a very good point where I bring in Clever finally before we go into the questions, to just reflect briefly. Clever, and thank you once again, and I think I speak for everyone today who is listening in, for that beautiful entry with which you landed us into this session. As a young person, you live in a system of inherited failures. And most young people today complain or describe existing in this very complex system that is a system of intertwined failures. Failures of systems, failures of organizations, failures of governments, failures of the family structure, failures of the society structure. How, as a young person, do you navigate these failures that on a day-to-day is present, is part of being, it's part of existing, and yet still within that are able to redefine what the future of a young person is or should be? Clever? Your 5 minutes.
My 5 minutes. All right. Thank you very much for me. So I think that one of the ways that the African youth gets to develop or demonstrate resilience and adaptability in the face of failure would be that we laugh and then we go again to explore ideas on how to prevail. I mean, it's quite easy to drown or lose life and vibrancy in the face of systemic failures, because you will get tired of trying and trying and trying again. But we see it on social media. The African youth would just laugh about, and it will look like they're not being serious, but the thing is, they're actually making a mental note, right? Mental note of matching solutions to problems. So it's like a self-reflection. Instead of drowning in the face of this, I would laugh and then explore ways to navigate this. Someone said to learn from the failures of others, but the African youth build resilience and learn adaptability from their own experience, and also by considering how others outside their space have navigated these challenges. So they're learning from their own experiences, but then they're also learning from the experiences of others. Okay, what did they do and how are they able to adapt in situations like this? How are they able to build resilience in situations like this? To sum it up, I would say that we build resilience and adaptability through creativity, open-mindedness, and collaborative communities. We cannot overestimate the significance of supportive and collaborative communities. In the face of failure, the mind stretches to see possibilities despite. So we can laugh about it, but still explore ideas on how to prevail. I think some of the strategies that we employ towards navigating these challenges would be that we adopt non-traditional learning. This is in form of volunteering, getting involved in youth work programs, because through these experiences, we're learning transferable skills. We're learning skills that would be valuable. I don't want to say tomorrow, so it doesn't sound cliche, but literally that would be valuable in another part of life, in another stage of life that we get to. Before I traveled abroad for studies, my sister was super big on getting me to volunteer at different organizations. Just looking at my track record of the places I lived in back in Nigeria at home, everywhere I went to, it was always about find a place to volunteer. It's not just that you have the skills, it's because you need to learn, it's because you need to be equipped, you need to be built. And I think this is one of the strategies that the African youths employ, to adapt despite the failing systems. I think I can cite a figure. I would say Tunde Onakoya. I have to be very careful with the name. Tunde Onakoya. I think we'd remember him as Tunde, the chess player. He struggled in school. He was mocked. you've seen his story or read his story or heard his story and called derogatory names. But look at him today. Big names want a picture with the chess player. The kid who could not read and write is being invited by institutions to speak on their esteemed podiums and platform. In my provocative piece at the start of this event, I said failing forward is a break period, right? That enables us to explore realities we might not have imagined before. So sometimes it takes self-reflection, creativity, and a community to build this resilience and just adapt, but then build resilience as well. I think in Nigeria, I would say something like, after I don't suffer, now then the idea hits me. So it's like it's like saying failure can open your mind to better realities only if you let it transform you. Koti Io is an example of an African youth who is leveraging digital technologies and social media for storytelling and self-expression. This is still under part of the strategies. Today, thousands of African youths use creative outlets to reframe narratives, to challenge existing structures and inspire others. Healthy perspectives like this eventually drive societal change. I discovered my co-speaker, Ebenezer Wikina, through the work he's doing on social media. So there was a social media platform. There was a page on social media that was, giving him his flowers because Ebenezer was challenging systems that refused to acknowledge Nigeria as an English-speaking country. And I thought to myself, my goodness, who is this person? I can only imagine how long it took for him to get to that point, or how many no's he got. But people were listening, and he was getting institutions to reconsider their policies in matters like this. And there he was, paving the way for millions of African youths like myself. And I mean, Ebenezer is in a better position to tell us his challenges, but let me just say that I really am in awe of this great person. So thank you for being so inspiring. And this leads me to my next point, which is another strategy employed by the African youth in terms of building resilience and adaptability. It is forming collaborative communities. I mentioned that earlier. Collaborative communities that encourage creativity, skill sharing, mutual support. Because the truth is, on my own, each of us individually, we will get to a point where we will be overwhelmed by failure. However, if there is a collaborative community, these ones have gone through the same things that I have, or even if they haven't, they recognize this weakness and recognize that I'm about to give up, that I'm about to just let the system swallow me up. And they come in together as a collaborative, supportive community, and they help me. So I think that's another way, that's another strategy. So having safe spaces where we can explore ideas, take risks, and learn from failures together. One example that I want to cite is Limo Blaze. I mean, he's a musician, and it's really amazing the strength, or rather the reach he's having. He's this boy from small town Makudi, and here he is moving with some very big names in the industry. But he's not doing that just by himself. He's creating collaborative communities as well to support people from who are in the same creative space as he is, and bringing them up as well. So it's not, don't drown in there, come on, I will help you, I will pull you out. So that's another thing.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm just very conscious of our time because we're still coming back to you. But actually, those are great insights, and thinking about creativity and open mind and collaborative communities. But for me, it's something you said about, in the face of failure, the mind stretches, and the role of resilience for the African youth, particularly to navigate failing systems. But that brings us back to the discussion. And Jesper, allow me to come back to you just quite briefly. particularly when we think around resilience and building of resilience and what that means. I just wanted to probe what lessons can be learned from institutional failures exposed by the global crisis. You alluded to some of this in your provocation earlier, and how these insights not only lead to the development of more resilient and adaptive institutions in Africa, but how can they also catalyze stronger regional cooperation and integration in the continent?
Thank you. This has been such a rich discussion. I think I come back to the point that we need to acknowledge and accept that stuff is failing when it is failing, and only then can we do something about it. So I think it's a question of seeing what is not working and organizing a structured approach to how to do that. And I think we already see, I mean, the examples given just this morning show clearly that people become resilient and find ways around the structural failings that are there, but it takes a lot more effort than it should, and it's very ineffective. So it's a question of acknowledging that you see a problem. It's finding a route to whoever you need to have that discussion with. And here comes the power dynamics. And it's very unequal. The people with money have the power. The people that need to live in a situation with dignity and so on don't have it. So I think it's a question of that, addressing that power dynamic, getting everyone to the table to discuss these things. We also see regionally in Africa where countries come together to mobilize themselves so that they are more organized, more structured, more open markets, learning from one another. We've heard examples of that here today. I think that's very useful. We need more of that, and we need to make sure that it's an inclusive situation. But that addressing that is not something you do and then it's fixed. It's something you wake up to every day. It's like democracy. You don't fix democracy and then it's done. You need to think about it and consider what's not working, what can we do better, where have we failed, why did we fail, looking at the external reasons, because there are many, but also at the internal reasons, addressing issues like corruption, like having a completely inclusive dialogue in a country or in a region, so that you surface those things. This is messy, and it's not, as I said, something you fix and then it's done, but it's something that you need to wake up to every day and think about, who do I need to talk to? What is it that we're talking about? Where do we need to take this? Because in all this, as in success is almost like the skin of a whole pile of failures, right? You don't arrive at success and, oh, I'm done. You fail your way to success, and then it's the narrative that sort of defines what is what. Failing many times is probably a good thing, because that's where you learn how to do it in a better way. But having said that, what is success? How do we, in developmental context and climate and adaptation and human rights and so on, what do we define as being a success? And since we don't really know that, we're just moving in a direction, we need to also consider that. What is it that we're actually aiming for? Because if you know that, you know maybe what you need to measure, what you need to look at. And only by measuring what we do can we improve what we do. You can only manage what you can look at and what you can measure.
Thank you very much for those, Jesper. And I think I'm struck by the question, what is success? And how do we measure success? And Geshe, allow me to put you on the spot here. Within that linear thinking on, or very non-linear thinking on what is success, because I think success can mean different things in different contexts to different people. But thinking from a continental perspective on how technology and AI can provide learning opportunities for urban development in Africa, what does success look like? in that regard? Geshi?
Okay, got it. Sorry. Thanks, Luca. We're doing a lot of
Yeah.
simultaneous work here. No, thank you for this question. And I think it's a wonderful one, and to me speaks to the point around innovation, right? So one of the recent projects we worked on was a book where we talked about innovation in Africa and needing to solve the problems we have. And the reason I raised that, it was kind of a joke, actually, the title of the book, because we called it Solving the Problems We Have, because we think a lot of effort actually goes into solving problems we don't have. And so to me, success looks like addressing the issues we have. I find it really interesting that we have whole systems and institutions of innovation, of science and technology, of creativity. They do all sorts of things. But somehow, if you were to even just look into what are, broadly the topics might appear relevant, but if you go into the specificity of what capital or what resources are going into, very rarely is it very specifically attuned to the issues that are affecting the lives of majority people. And so to me, success looks like that. Success looks like seeing some relationship between where resources are going and what issues actually are. And for some reason, we seem to be in a world where even at the level of a city and how we define or conceptualize value, it somehow doesn't seem to be about that. And I think the thing is, I always say with technology, it's garbage in, garbage out. It can do the things you ask it to do, but it's not going to reimagine or frame the question that you're asking for you, right? And so our ability, I think, to frame the right question, decide what is it that matters, who is it that matters, and who is it that doesn't matter, what is the measure of success, I think is the starting point. Otherwise, success can look like anything, but it's only relative to what you actually think the problem is.
Thank you very much. I think that hits the nail right on the head for me. And speaking about innovation, Ebenezer, I'm back to putting you on the spot again. Just asking you in all of, and I think I need to read back what Jesper said about success being the skin of a whole pilot of failures and you failing your way towards success. Now, in all of your approaches, what approaches have you found to be very innovative, which have proven effective in enhancing grassroots mobilization? And how do you think that these innovations empower communities and help to amplify their voices in addressing urban social injustices?
Yeah, I'm just trying to put on my video. I think Luca's trying to figure. Okay, thanks. Thank you so much, Luca. So yes, wonderful question. I mean, +1. I mean, I've been +1 into everything that Professor Gessi has been saying. Because totally the same thinking. I think that there's so many. Sorry. So I think can you guys see?
You can go on.
Okay,
yeah,
okay.
We can.
I think that's there have been so many like examples of indigenous like African societies that have shown us, how cities in many ways can help bring people together. I think the way we used to build houses and build our towns before used to have something, and I don't. For those who are from Nigeria, I think you see this in other parts of rural Africa. I just shared something in the chat of how cities were built in a way where we would be able to have a space where we can freely congregate. And so people would often have a place where they can come together. They have their own houses and have different locations, but then there's a place where people can easily come together and congregate. But I think that as we're borrowing like a lot of like innovation from the Western world, I think we're sort of like losing that a bit, right? Because we're building upwards. You're having cities that are, skyscrapers, everything is going high, very, again, technology, innovative, but we're losing that indigenous knowledge and indigenous spaces where we're not able to come together to congregate and speak and learn, and because those spaces were spaces for learning and speaking. And so that's also like affected grassroots movements as well, right? Because if you look at Nigeria, one of the most recent movements that we had was the NSAS movement, and that happened at the toll gates because we really didn't have like other space where people can actually go to actually speak together and protest, right? Most of these also other spaces in other countries too are also being like shutdowns. So if you go to Abuja in Nigeria, for example, there used to be the Unity Fountain where people will come to sit down and discuss. That place is closed down now. And many governments, repressive governments, are thinking of ways to create spaces for us to connect and engage and mobilize. There are now spaces where people cannot mobilize. So just speaking to the example that Clever gave earlier, when we thought about the Reform IELTS campaign, we knew that we wouldn't be able to physically get a space to come together, right? Like it was almost going to be impossible to bring young people from all across the continent to have a physical space. And so we thought of using technology, and that's what Professor Gershi just spoke about, like using technology and sort of like defining for ourselves what success would be. I mean, we wanted a campaign where no institution around the world would ask, can you guys still hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good.
Clearly.
No institution around the world would ask an English-speaking African to prove that they can speak English, whether they study, whether they apply for jobs or education or anything anywhere. That was our global goal, right? But when we started the campaign, there was so much resistance from a lot of institutions in the US and the UK. I mean, the UK, of course, being the leader in all of this. And I think that made us to sort of like, while we're going, reiterate what success would mean for us. And so we thought to ourselves and said, hold on, I mean, we don't think it's a huge global system, right? Perspective. Let's narrow it down. We have young Africans studying in universities across the world. And these young Africans themselves are ambassadors for what we're advocating for. I mean, they study in these schools, they come out with distinctions, they're commencement speakers, etc., part of the alumni groups. How can they become the ambassadors for this campaign? And so we mobilized ourselves using technology and had over 80,000 young people in a particular space where we're able to give ourselves, the charge to say, take this message to your own university, take this message to your own school, tell them that, young Africans who come to this school, just like you, have competence, do not need to write this particular test. And this test costs more than twice the minimum wage in Nigeria, actually thrice now in Nigeria, the current falling currency rates.
Yeah.
4 times in Ghana and continent. And the success, just to keep it short, that we got the win because we failed globally, but we then had these young people go to the institutions to begin to make the change at that grassroots level. And I think that's how we're able to mobilize around this. So in spaces where we have repressive regimes who have sort of like restricted physical gatherings, I think leveraging technology becomes like a way, to sort of like walk around that and mobilize people electronically and digitally to sort of like make movements still possible. So yes, if you put hashtag Reform IELTS, you'll see a lot more about the stories on this moment. Yeah,
Thank you very much, Ebenezer. Thank you. Let me quickly circle back. Ebenezer has spoken to what initiatives, approaches, strategies have worked from a grassroots level. And let's come back to a continental level and bring you back on board, Prof. Nanima. I go back again to Jesper's initial response about acknowledgement of failure and the fact that in acknowledging failure, that there is failure and that failure exists, and Erin says we must be comfortable in the fact that failure is an everyday thing and sit comfortably with that. However, there are other deeper acknowledgements that fall within that, including the skewed power dynamics within failure in and of itself, and who can, for lack of a better word, rescue us from this failure. Prof. Nanima, I'd like to ask what necessary reforms within our currently existing regional institutional frameworks do you think can better represent and serve Africa's interest, understanding the power dynamics at play, particularly when we think about governance, transparency, and inclusivity on a city level? Robert? In the meantime, can I please invite you, if you have any questions, please pop them into the chat. My colleague Jokudu will be taking those questions down, and we will do a quick, please unmute Robert, and we will be doing a quick round robin across the panelists to respond to those questions. So Robert, let's quickly go to you.
Thank you very
2
much.
minutes.
I was trying to use sign language and I remembered I'd failed to learn it. So I had to use the chat box just to be unmuted. I would like to latch on what has been said, especially by Jasper, in terms of success being a place of failures. But let me add a small anecdote. It's a place of failures, but from a contextual and a process perspective. Context in that success should not be what I have done at the end of the day, but it should be that thing that makes spaces, that makes people be attracted to what I'm doing as an individual, as an organization, as a government. That attraction, that kind of energy that brings them to embrace what I'm doing. I think that's what we should count as success. But above all, the process. In that the process would involve placing the challenge at the center. What is the challenge that we have? If we're talking about a specific question, I think Geshe spoke to this. What is the question that we are asking? If the question is about children, which child? In which space? Is it the African child? Is it the African woman? In which space? I think so. It starts with, first of all, in terms of reforms, apart from just going on a hula baloo to engage the reforms, what are these interests that we can identify as Africa, as cities, as nations? Whose interests are these? Who has identified them? How participatory has been the process across the board? Where are the resources tagged to? Because at times when the resources are not from within, they have specific limits in terms of use, at times in terms of how long they can be used, at times they run out. What are the priorities that they represent? Is there some kind of regional consensus? Is there some kind of consensus at a city level, at a national level? When we answer those questions, then we also look at the institutions currently. Do they have the ability to efficiently and effectively engage going forward? Do they have the ability to the end that if they are operating efficiently, they can lead to a specific result? If they are operating effectively, they can lead to a better result. I think asking more questions should be part of coming out of this connotation, the conundrum of failure, because we always have the narrative of having answers to questions, yet at times we need questions to the answers. Questioning some of the answers that we give helps in that process. So having a challenge-centered approach that puts the challenge at the center, it helps us from our different spaces, whether at the continental level, at the regional level, at the national level, to use our resources to identify interventions that speak to the challenges. When we have interventions that are as a result of how we look at the challenges from a vantage point, then we shall be able to have the reforms. So I cannot say that the reforms should be, let's do A, let's do B, let's do C, but the reforms should be structured in a manner that creates a challenge-centered approach that looks at them. One specific area that has always been forgotten is the use of the regional economic communities. There's a lot that SADC can do within the SADC region that South Africa will easily listen to, as opposed to what the AU is saying to what South Africa do. There's a lot that Uganda will do because the East African community is speaking, as opposed to the AU. There's a lot that Nigeria will do because of ECOWAS, as opposed to what the AU would do. So using the bridge of the regional economic communities to act as the bridge from the states, to act as the bridge to the bigger perspective of the AU, I think that becomes very instructive. So the necessary reforms, yes, they will need to latch on the institutional frameworks. How do they work better? How do they produce better results? How do we have better activities? But above all, how do we ask the right question? The right global inequity question in that space which has diversities, to have a solution that speaks to the problem.
Thank you very much.
I hand over back to you.
Thank you very much for that, Robert. And I think thank you for drawing our minds back to beyond when we think from a regional perspective about the AU. There are these other blocks of regional economic mechanisms that we should be looking into, we should be leaning into, particularly for context-specific questions or challenges which we need to be addressing, because the challenges of East Africa are not always reflective of the challenges of West Africa or the challenges in Southern Africa. And I think we also need to be aware of that as practitioners, as academics, on the fact that, like you've rightly put it, what questions are we asking? And who do we need to ask these questions about? Thank you. I think I'm going to come back again with regards to asking questions. Erin, you opened this can of worms around us asking questions and around us sitting comfortably with the question of failure being in the constant. I just want to probe a little bit to ask how in your practice you've seen artistic and creative expression help both individuals and communities within Africa to navigate and to interpret failures, and what unique insights that this can offer into overcoming setbacks and bringing it back to Clever's discussion around fostering resilience within communities. Erin?
Sorry, I was just waiting to be muted.
Okay.
I think that the thing with failure is, I think the biggest time that I've seen it, the biggest engagement with failure in like my practice has been working in the museum. Last year I worked quite a bit in the South African National Museum, and which isn't specifically art, it's working with culture and art and history and things like that. And the biggest failure they're currently dealing with is having a massive archive of objects and artifacts and artworks that were collected very unethically within the colonial project, because museums kind of emerge within the colonial project as an attempt to glorify colonial powers and to minimize the value and beauty and complexity and intelligence in indigenous cultures and wherever those museums pop up in colonized countries. So we have these archives that are full of very well preserved, or quite well preserved artifacts from cultures, but they were collected unethically and were collected to display as lesser cultures, which is a very difficult thing post-apartheid, where you have people from those cultures, of people who just care more. How do we deal with an archive full of objects that were collected and stored disrespectfully? And there's so many different theories on what to do with these things. So it's this huge failure of an archive, because an archive is about preserving something that you care about. And so it's an archive that was produced not with that intention. And so we've had a lot of discussions with a lot of the people that work in the museums, and in our exhibition, one of the things I would say in doing walkabouts, because we engaged a lot with these problems, is I was we're not going to come up with a solution tomorrow. There's no one solution. We're not going to just wake up tomorrow and figure out how to fix an archive of 500,000 objects that need to be loved and cared for. We're not going to figure that out tomorrow. So I think that was a really good experience in terms of engaging with failures in culture and in cultural and artistic spaces, because it was very important to understand that all we can do is continuously try. And because there is no way to succeed, really. There is no way. We have objects in there that were taken as war trophies off of indigenous people, and we cannot return them to the families because we don't even know what area of the country those objects are from. And there are bodies in there that were grave robbed bodies in the National Museum archive, and we want to return them and bury them properly and bury them according to that person's cultural practice, but again, we don't know where they're from. So it's just this space where there are many things, where the archive becomes a place of purgatory, where there are many objects, there are many people in the archive that are going to be failed. We are going to fail them. And it was a lot about learning, how do you sit with just, you are going to fail, and all you can do is try, and how do you fail well? How do you fail in a way, in the best possible way? So it's like, how do you engage with an archive where you cannot honor the objects and the people in the archive? So what do we do now? So I think that's one space where I've had to engage with failure a lot. And then at the moment, the work I'm doing now, I'm currently in Johannesburg now, and I'm working on an art fair that works with 13 venues across the Johannesburg CBD. I don't know if anyone's been to Johannesburg CBD, but it is a very good example of a failed city. There are buildings that are totally empty and dilapidated. At the moment, the streets are filled with trash because the the people who generally clean up are on strike. It is a very difficult, intense city, and it used to be occupied by a lot of banks and a lot of businesses because it's a city, but they've all moved to Sandton, which is like a second CBD, and that's where the money is, so they've gone there. So the city's sort of been abandoned. But what has happened in that is the property values have gone down, which means artists can afford to rent huge studios. So now we have the radius of the city is 7 kilometers. Oh no, Johannesburg is not, it's been abandoned by businesses, that's what I meant, not by people. The people are still here, but I meant people with money. Big businesses have left. The people that the government generally gives more resources to have left, so it's just left people. So in the 7 kilometer radius of the city, there are more than 13 huge 6-story buildings, some with having generally 100 artists each. And so there's the artists and the creatives have become, and there's theaters and arts, so the creative have become the custodians of the city. They've become the people who look after the city and enliven it, because so there's all the business, the money leaves, and then the artists arrive. And I think that's another example of art engaging with failures. Oh, there's a failure there, that's where we'll go. We'll go with the failure and pick it up, and we'll see what we can do. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Erin. And I will bring, before I hand over to Jokudu, I think I have 3 minutes to ask my last question to Clever. And Clever, this is literally based on, and you started off this topic around resilience and building resilience and adaptability in the face of systemic failures and being born into a failing system. And I just want to ask you on a personal note, what has served, and I think you alluded to some of that, as strategies to help navigate these challenges of living and being born into a failing system. And also what role you think exists for young people currently in leading movements and advocating for systemic change.
Right. Thank you. I don't know if, oh, okay, great. Yeah. I was checking to see if I could still turn on my camera. Thank you. One of the strategies, like you rightly said, I did mention a couple of them earlier, but one would be having an entrepreneurial mindset. I know that I don't have a head for business, but just, recognizing the strength in people around me, partnering with people who have, business management skills, that is an entrepreneurial mindset, collaborating with this kind of people, and then leveraging off their strength and my strength and combining that is one way to go. An example that I would cite, Vicky James. I think we remember Hilda the chef. And I think one of the things really that they've done, I'm saying this from the perspective of a digital creative, is the ability to leverage the power of, digital technologies, especially social media. I think earlier someone spoke about how the world, rightly acknowledged that the world is becoming a global village. And another person talked about, leveraging digital technologies. So definitely these are strategies that can be combined and, leveraged or used by the African youth. And to respond to the question of the role that we have, young people have in terms of, this change or in the face of failure, I think our role really would be active participants in shaping our future. There has to be a willingness to persist despite a failing system. I met a young Somalian recently, and he was so passionate about, the African continent, and he was, talking about all the African countries he's been to, and just sharing solutions and ideas that he has. And he definitely wants to get in on the action and give the best of himself towards the development of his country and the other African countries as well. So that active participation, intentionally thinking of ways, to navigate this instead of just drowning in that. So definitely we need to get up, we need to stand up, we need to stop waiting for a savior somewhere to come and save us. We are in charge of, how our life plays out, how our life moves. And examples of youth activism that I could give would be the Mukuru Transformation Youth Agenda in Kenya. It's a youth-led organization that emerged from the Mukuru slums, providing creative solutions to challenge the lack of sanitization, education, and employment opportunities. Ebenezer was speaking about the NSARS movement, and that's definitely, a significant show of activism on the part of the Nigerian youth. That was a loud movement that echoed around the world. And then we look at Senegal as well, and them choosing a 44-year-old to be their president is definitely a significant, act of youth activism.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Clever. I think before we finally close, I want to hand over to my colleague, Jokudu, who has been fielding the questions. I can see some questions have already been answered or are being answered on the chat. We're sorry that we're unable to unmute all of you because of the oopsie moments we had earlier in the session. So please continue to use the chat function to send through your questions. Jokudu, I don't know if there are any particular questions you want to pose to any of the panelists that have come through from the chat so far.
Yes, I think I can start with the one that's already getting answered, just because I saw that Ebenezer liked the comment. So I'd like to pose it to you since our other two speakers have responded to the question, which is, where do we draw the line to resilience and trying to gain or to recognize that this isn't going to work, try as I may. Should I pick another career path, venture, method, etc.? And is there any room for this?
Please unmute Ebenezer. Ebenezer, I think you're unmuted now.
I'm muted now. Okay, yes, thanks. Thank you. Yeah, so wonderful question, and plus one again to Jasper and Clever for the wonderful responses to that. I would say that the watchword for me in this context would be flexibility. Just knowing that you're flexible enough, as Jasper said, he's not even practicing his first career choice, right? Just knowing that you're flexible enough to try other things, right? I think they say insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. So I would say knowing when to draw the line between insane and experimental. It's a very thin line, But knowing, I mean, I think just in you just like your subconscious, I think at some point will tell you that if you try something maybe like 4, 5, 6, 7 times, perhaps it's time to try something else, you know. So I would say just knowing that thin line and ensure that you don't cross the line to insanity, and being flexible, you know, being flexible to try other approaches, being flexible to learn from other case studies as well. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ebenezer. Yeah, it very much echoes even just your response very much echoes even just what Keva said in her initial provocation around Taiwo and Taiwo's journey. So I'd actually like to just shift gears a little bit and go back to the conversation that was happening between Robert and some comments from Geshe, and perhaps just ask both of you. I think my provocation comes from the book that Geshe spoke around perhaps we should be thinking about the problems we have and finding solutions for those. And what's coming through for me is wondering whether perhaps the problem or the challenge that we're facing is in not identifying the correct problem, as Ebenezer had also shared, trying to find the root cause. So I just wanted to get your reflections as well on that. Perhaps maybe we can start with Geshe and then we'll come back to Robert.
Okay, good. It's working now. Hi, Jukudu. Thank you for the question. Sorry, do you want us to go back to the conversation about the solving the problem? Is that what you asked?
Yes, definitely. Expand on it with an additional point. And for my end, it's more so understanding, are we perhaps not getting the problem right?
Yeah. I think often we are not, and then sometimes it's both not getting the problem right, and then in a way making the tools the problem. And what do I mean by that? I think sometimes we're easily distracted. I've been surprised at in how many instances, you know, because I'm involved in this digital work, people want to frame the question as the digital. So, you know, then I'm like, no, our problem is not AI. That's not a problem we have. Yes, I mean, I suppose if you're in the tech world and the policy world, maybe in that sense, you could say that we do have to think about. So if you're asking it as an STI question, then that's one thing. If you're asking it as a development question, that's not the question we have, you know? And so I do think we get it wrong. I think we get distracted. I think there are reasons for it. I saw a really interesting paper at last year's IceGov where somebody did research, actually in Sweden, so in the Nordic context, interviewing municipalities to see or to try and understand why they were pursuing smart city agendas. And it was a very interesting piece of research because in most cases, it turned out that it had more to do with political showmanship, meaning politicians wanting to be able to say that they had a smart city, or wanting to modernize. So there's a very strong modernist push to be able to show that you're hip and cool and doing, you know, the things that you ought to as a modern municipality. And there were other such frivolous things. Very little of it actually had to do with they were pursuing it because they thought it would actually address the challenges they're facing and that it's something they really need to do. And that was a much lower response. And she did some good analysis, the researcher, about just that. Now, how much worse I'm sure it would be if she did that study in our context. And we've recently done a paper on smart city, like a lit review, a bibliometric study on smart city thinking in the SADC region. And very similarly, you find that these things get motivated by the social and development issues, but very rarely is that then reflected in what the agenda becomes. So I do think we get the question wrong. And I think that's something that I'm really glad is coming up in this conversation. Maybe Robert will add.
Yeah, Robert?
Thank you very much. I liked the tone that Ebenezer brought to the fore, creating the line, noting the distinction between experimental and insanity. So I'm going to give examples that might not fit within the conversation, but from a structural perspective, from an architectural perspective, they'll help with the conversation. At one time, the OAU then felt they needed a terrorism convention, a convention to deal with terrorism because cities were being bombed, which they did. But they forgot the part that they needed a body to monitor that convention. Or just like having a city, but you need a proper management system for the city. So they amended the convention using a protocol. The convention was in 1999, amended it in 2004 with a protocol, stating we shall have this organization that uses a security perspective to monitor. Now, the challenge that did not take on a human rights approach, did not take on actual problems facing people. It was more about security. If there is a problem, I think we should first lock you up and ask questions later. Now, then later it's discovered, but we need to add a human face. We need to add a child rights based face to this. And what I'm trying to bring to the conversation is that we learned from that there is need to question the answers that we are giving. When we question the answers that we are giving, we shall add value that is necessary for improvements. And it was an introspection. For instance, we had this global child rights convention, but it was questioned. The question was, where is the African child? Where issues that affect the African child, armed conflict, etc., health, education. Because some specific questions had not been answered, we came up with a continental document. So what I'm saying is, a great way to delineate experimental from insanity is in asking questions to the answers that we give. In doing so, we shall always add value. And I believe that will be instructive going forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert and Geshe, for those responses. Very important. Yeah, the question we asked and interrogating that will help us quite a lot. It's important. It's really important. That Geshe has also said in the chat. With our last question, I won't necessarily ask it, but I will just prompt Jesper to please share with us the insights that came from the study you did on failure. I think everyone in the room would be really curious to learn what's emerged from that. We won't be able to answer all the questions that came into the chat, and hopefully our speakers have been able to crawl through and give their responses and reflections to many of those. But thank you all so much for the inputs that you've given. We would like to conclude with some final reflections from our speakers. Any comments that you have that other speakers spoke about, or any final inputs that you'd like to share that we weren't able to give the space to discuss. We can perhaps start with Jesper, since the mic is already on.
Thank you. And thanks for a wonderful session, everyone, and organizing it. It's a pretty big undertaking. And also amazing contributions from all the panelists. I've picked up on a lot of things, and I will follow up with some conversations in the near future. The main finding, and I'll share the link if there's interest in the chat when I'm done talking. The main findings, and we interviewed funders of and investors of climate and adaptation issues, so big ones, multilateral, large bilateral foundations, and private commercial entities that also invest. The main finding was, and it was really clear, that the power dynamics is a major problem, and it's something that is not taken into account when trying to come up with a way to be innovative and allow for failure and sort of fail forward. There is also a structural problem, and you can read more about this in the link, but there's also a structural problem that I think you all recognize, in that you define something and you don't really set the success clearly, what it is that you're aiming for. You don't put the problem, you answer the wrong question, as has been so excellently covered already by the other panelists. You do something and then you arrive at the destination and you failed, and then you hide it usually, and then you move on and you try maybe the same thing again, a definition of insanity. And instead, maybe there is a way to test option A and option B, and then based on where you land, if you arrive at A or B, you look at your assumptions, you explore what is under your control, what cannot be controlled, and then you try the same thing again, so that you have several iterations. It took Dyson, the inventor of the vacuum cleaner, more than 6,000 prototypes before he came up with what we all now know as a vacuum cleaner. I mean, that is probably a definition of insanity in its own right, but just to sort of show that You need to test something, and then you need to test something again. And this is particularly difficult when it comes to systems and processes. It's easier when it comes to products. I'll share the link. I'd love to talk more about failure.
Thank you, Jesper. Thank you so much for those insights. Can I invite the other panelists for your closing reflections of 30 seconds? Erin, can we start with you?
Yeah, I just think I really appreciate hearing like so many different like perspectives and fields, like people from different fields talking about failure. I think that it's really exciting because I think that things often feel separate, but they obviously all intersect. And it was just really amazing to hear everyone's very exciting thoughts and experiences with failure.
Thank you.
I had already spoken, but I would love to say that one other thing that I've learned from Jesper is that insanity could actually be subjective. If it's not with regard to systems, if it's with regard to specific aspects. So what's interesting is that we should always have these conversations. It has been a great learning curve for me. Special kudos to, I've forgotten the name, to the young lady that spoke first. My apologies.
Clever.
Yes, she laid a very good platform on which we had the conversations. And thank you to Ekley for leading in this conversation. It speaks to the moral authority that you have ascertained in this space, and may you continue to do more. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ebenezer?
Yeah, no, I mean, just to echo Professor Roberts, yeah, this has been a very insightful conversation, just learning from several perspectives on failure. And I think that what this session has told me is that we need to keep talking about failure. You know, thanks to Rise Africa for first creating the platform for us to talk about this. But I hope we can kind of like scale these conversations to other forums to ensure that we keep talking about failure, the lessons we've learned, the challenges we're facing. Because sometimes the solutions are not only in the successes, but they're also there in the failures as well. So I think just being talking about this and elevating this has really useful for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Geshi?
Mute and video. Okay. Okay, can't on video yet. Okay, no, thank you so much. I want to add just one thing. As a big proponent for what we call responsible futures, I also just want to add that it's not just about failing Nje and having no responsibility for the outcomes of that. There can be really huge implications. So maybe just to add to the point that Jesper was making about the kind of, the iteration, the many failures one may have to undertake. One of the lessons I learned from Denmark is documentation. In science, you learn that an experiment is only an experiment if you're actually documenting and learning. Otherwise, just failing, that's also, not just insanity, but stupid and irresponsible. So let's not be stupid and irresponsible.
Thank you very much for giving that context. And finally, to Clever. Your 30 seconds.
Okay, can you hear me? I just
yes, we can.
Okay, the host is not allowing. Okay. Definitely. Thank you so much to the entire team at iClear Africa for this wonderful opportunity. I have learned so much, and definitely would take the lessons that I have learned and apply them as well. My last words would be that it's a quote from John Dewey, actually. It is, failure is instructive, right? And we should always see failure as an opportunity that allows us to explore the realities we might not have imagined before. So yeah, that would be it from me. Thank you.
Thank you from myself, from Luca, from Jukudu, and from the entire iClear Africa team. We say thank you very much for joining us in this conversation about sitting comfortably, yet responsibly with failure. Thank you very much, Geshi, for that point, for that prompt. There is a survey in the chat. We want to please prompt you to please take the survey. Just click on the link. It will open up in your browser. and to please take the survey immediately after this session. We invite you to join other sessions and to also join our online storm on on Africa Day, which is on Saturday. On that note, from me and the entire team, thank you very much. And it was great speaking about failure. Bye.